Hello, and thank you for joining us for Data, Culture, and Technology, Why the Digital Economy Needs a New Playbook. We'd like to give a special thank you to our partner, EXL, for helping bring this event to life. Please note, closed captioning is available for this event by clicking CC in the video player. We are excited to have you be a part of the conversation. During the event, we want to hear from you. You can ask questions to our speakers by utilizing Slido. You will see a Join the Conversation button located at the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You can also join by visiting slido.com from your mobile device and entering the event code #ForbesData. Now, please join me in welcoming Rich Karlgaard, Global Futurist and Editor-at-Large, Forbes.
Thank you and welcome, everyone. What an exciting and high-powered panel we have today. Culture eats strategy for breakfast is a famous quote from the great Peter Drucker, a legendary management consultant from the 20th century. To be clear, Drucker did not suggest that strategy was unimportant. Rather, he meant that a healthy culture is foundational to organizational success. Culture, of course, is the sum of people, and Drucker believed people were assets. In fact, you should know that Drucker coined the term knowledge worker. Believe it or not, that was in 1959, the same year that the silicon chip was born. That's pretty prescient, I would say. Drucker attained his international influence long ago. It began in 1946 with a book that analyzed the most successful company in the world at the time, General Motors. The book was called The Concept of a Corporation. The CEO of GM didn't like it, but Drucker was eventually proven right in his criticisms. Drucker remained a peak management influencer for decades through the 1990s. Now, when exactly Drucker first said culture eats strategy for breakfast is not known, but certainly was well before the digital landscape that we have today, with supercomputer power available to from the cloud to anyone with a credit card, with ubiquitous data, with powerful analytics, and tools morphing into AI and machine learning. So let me ask you, if Peter Drucker were alive today, would he still say culture eats strategy for breakfast? It's an important question. After all, we live in an era in which baseball managers use data analytics to write their lineups and make substitutions. Basketball coaches pull their star player because the data and analytics suggest an injury is just around the corner. Having great data makes it tempting to downplay or dismiss soft virtues like culture in sports and in business. So where does culture fit in today's business era of overwhelming data and analytics? Are culture and data at the opposite ends of the management spectrum, or do they actually play together quite well? I want to thank our sponsor, EXL, for hosting today's panel, which will attempt to add clarity and insight to this question. And does the digital economy need a new playbook? Let's go to our panel.
EXL's vision is to be the indispensable partner for data-led businesses, focusing in on the business outcome, combining and orchestrating human ingenuity along with technological advancement, and combining that together, we are able to use data to be able to predict where there might be growth spurts, where there might be a resurgence of activity, so that we can position our clients to take advantage of those situations.
Now, please join me in welcoming panelists Linda Avery, Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Verizon; Robert Huntsman, Chief Data Scientist, U.S. Businesses, Prudential Financial; Shinu Katru, CEO, Optum Life Sciences; Rohit Kapoor, Vice Chairman and CEO, EXL; and moderator Rich Karlgaard, Global Futurist and Editor-at-Large, Forbes.
Rohit, I want to start with you. I want to have all the panelists describe in their own words what their company does from a mission perspective, in their own words, not corporate communications words, because I think mission really goes right to the heart of what culture is. But Rohit, you have a wonderful phrase, data plus people is magic. So clearly you think that data and culture are on the same side of the equation. Describe what you mean by that, and then describe how it fits into the context of your mission at EXL and how you serve your customers.
Thanks, Rich, and thanks for having me here. So, the best way for me to describe EXL's mission is that we want to be a strategic business partner to data led businesses. Our viewpoint of the world is that every single firm that is going to successfully compete in the marketplace is going to be a data led business. So, our whole objective is how can we help our clients create value out of data and help them in their digital transformation journey? That's what we are focused in on. Now, you asked me about this question on data plus people and how does that kind of come together, whether that's at conflict or whether that's in harmony. We have a simple concept that we adopt at EXL, which we call as orchestration. You can have the best technology, the best access to data assets, but unless and until you know how to pick and choose and apply these and bring them into context in a real-time environment, it's useless in the current marketplace. So you really have to orchestrate and bring together the ingenuity of the people, which we call as human ingenuity, and apply that to technology, apply that to data, and that's where you create magic. Think about it as a conductor, a music conductor, really being able to tap into the best parts of a symphony and produce music that we all want to listen to. That's what EXL tries to do. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about how I think we can do that and what that new playbook looks like.
Well, just before we go to the next panelist, talk about speed, digital acceleration, and why data and culture and people need to come together when things are happening so fast. And I'll just tell you that almost everybody that I've talked to who really sees the technology at the root level, whether it's Scott Guthrie, the CEO of Microsoft Azure, or Pat Gelsinger at Intel, everybody at that level is describing a world in which we are moving 2 to 3 times faster than the 50-year era of Moore's law because of the confluence of the cloud, ubiquitous data, new analytics tools, 5G, and so on. And so companies need to move at the pace of digital evolution, or they're not going to be healthy companies going forward. How does speed really sort of elevate the importance of culture and data at the same time?
Sure. So, the consumer mindset has completely changed over the last couple of years. The consumer mindset now is an on-demand, digital-first mindset. The consumer expects products and services to be offered to them in real time. They expect their service provider or product provider to know who they are and know and anticipate what they would like to have. And all of this needs to be done in real time. So we call this the millisecond economy, and that's completely changed over the last couple of years. Now, in order to be responsive to that consumer in a millisecond economy, you've got to act with speed. And again, there is tons and tons of data that resides in a company, in a corporation. There's a lot of technology that allows us to automate it and serve a product or a service to a consumer. But applying that in real time, that's where I think the trick is, because many companies get that wrong. Today, for example, just simple consumer lending. There's buy now, pay later, where you're on the internet, you're looking at different offers, and as you're thinking about what you want to buy, you need to have a credit offering in real time for that particular piece of equipment, that merchandise, or whatever that you might be buying at that time. So bringing in the connectivity from the data, applying that, and being able to, present a credit decision to that consumer becomes really, really critical. So speed actually has become even more important than price, even much more important than distribution, and a number of other aspects. And it's really gained prominence. And it's in nowhere else is it more applicable than how you use data and make that available to the consumer.
I want to go to Linda. And parenthetically, if we have a lot of time, I don't know if we will, I want to ask about her previous job at the Federal Reserve of New York with all the questions about the economy and interest rates and so on. But let's talk about Verizon. And describe how, in your mind, the mission of Verizon, particularly how it applies to this enormous task of reinventing a company like Verizon as you have over the last 2 years. Given the size and legacy of Verizon, how do data and culture play into moving this very large organization to the future?
Well, it's a very interesting question, and thank you so much for having me here, because if I were to describe my role as Chief Data and Analytics Officer, my role is focused on change management and communication. So if I were to look at what I am doing, it really is in terms of evolving the culture. I mean, going back to, the promise of Verizon, it is essentially the opportunity to use connectivity for good that attracted me to Verizon. Mission was very important to me in my role at the Federal Reserve, and it was continued to be important in terms of my choice to join Verizon. And Rohit, you talked about speed. All of this is enabled to the connectivity that, we see becoming more and more available through 5G. But, there's so many decisions that have to be made in a company the size of Verizon. I think so much of it comes down to, being able to have that common telemetry, to have a common truth that the leadership is operating in. And that, of course, is a challenge. When I talk about cultural change, data tells a story, and people want to basically retain the control of their story. So I think that, as I mentioned before, it's about getting in there. And what you see is basically an evolution in terms of like how we're using AI, first to inform. Then it's basically what you're looking at is recommend. And then you move into automate. And then you start getting data and an AI into the actual strategy. And we're operating at all levels right now at Verizon. And I have a tendency to brag a little bit, but last year, our AI and data organization actually drove $2 billion worth of value at Verizon. So clearly we have the adoption and we're just beginning. But when I look at the promise of what Verizon has, when I think about, connectivity for good, telecommunications has really evolved from being about just connecting people to one another, to connecting them with knowledge, to commerce, to imagination. And so, of course, the question is how connectivity combined with distributed compute, AI capabilities, the cloud capabilities, how can that reinvent transportation, healthcare, manufacturing, the running of hospitals? And I think at the end of the day, is about how do we make the power of all this available at all levels, to small businesses, the consumer, of course, and to the enterprise level. So that's really what we're trying to drive.
I applaud you for your for the speed of your 5G rollout. And I about a year ago, I interviewed Tammy Irwin, who's the CEO of Verizon Business, as you know.
Yeah.
And
Tammy, well.
What an impressive set of entrepreneurial C-level executives you have at Verizon today. She knew, I can hardly think of a company that had to bear the burdens of pandemic shock more than Optum. Can you describe what it was like to be at a healthcare and services company like Optum and pharmaceutical company during this time of extraordinary demands on your industry? And later we'll get to sort of, as part of the culture, we'll dip into the future of work and the Great Resignation. But how did sort of the mission of Optum and your use of data get you through a very challenging period?
No, thank you, Rich, for having us. And as you said, COVID and all that was associated with COVID really did force a lot of hard issues to the forefront. Optum, for those of you who do not know, is a healthcare services company. We have a very privileged seat within the healthcare ecosystem that we support multiple facets of the health system. So we're providers, life sciences companies, state governments. There's probably nowhere that health services doesn't happen. And Rich, actually going back to your original question, like what is the mission for us as a health services company? That is critical to the way we live, and it is twofold. One is to help individuals live healthier lives, and two, for us, particularly at Optum, is to make the health system work better. And obviously, with COVID, it came quite as a shock to us. It wasn't something that we expected, but it made us show up in a way that we hadn't necessarily done before, which is there were immediate needs that we saw with patients, there were immediate needs that we saw with our clients, whether they be providers or life sciences companies. And all of that was, of course, predicated on having data. I'd like to believe we had great data. Rohit's shaking his head. He'll know some of it wasn't so great, but it really enabled us to make better decisions in the moment than ever before and really force us to reckon with some of the gaps that we have within the healthcare system. And frankly, also a reckoning of some of the data that we had, which pointed to the fact that, as I said, gaps, including inequities and health as it related to healthcare. And so what I'm excited about as we're kind of emerging across these next 2.5 years is the real fragmentation that has happened in healthcare. The way we consume healthcare is also reflected in the data as well. And so I'm looking forward to, as is I think many of my colleagues at Optum, is how do we solve for the data gaps so we can tell a better picture, and so that individuals, wherever they are in the health system, whether they're providers, whether they're life sciences companies trying to make better decisions about therapeutics, we're able to make get the best insights.
Yeah, and it's one of the great challenges on earth, not least because the healthcare system is one of the largest industries on earth, but there is a lot of legacy and there's a lot of sort of autonomy that it's, in principle sounds good, but in terms of data unification poses a challenge. There are privacy laws, there are other regulations, and maybe we'll come back and at some point have all three of you talk about the regulatory issues in your industry, because you're all regulated businesses, which leads me to Prudential. Now, if Optum had the challenge of a lifetime over the last 2 years, my goodness, any financial services firm today, trying to figure out whether we're going to have a recession or not, what our interest rates are going to be, whether inflation is transitory and beginning to come down, or whether earlier this week, this report of highest inflation on a month-over-month basis since 1982 is the start of something new and scary. And all of that really means, I would repeat what a manager at a financial services firm told me, but it has so many swear words. So I'll let Robert talk about it in his own words. The mission of Prudential and the role of culture and data during a time of almost unprecedented uncertainty in the financial markets.
No, thank you very much. The last 2 years have been a really transformational period for Prudential. One of the observations that we made was that during this period of COVID, we actually saw that it really accelerated the transformation of the business, because agents couldn't talk to their customers. Customer service reps could no longer have one-on-one engagement outside of the telephone or computer. So it accelerated our use of data. It accelerated our use of AI. And so what ultimately happened is that over the last 2 years, we transformed into a company that's now instantly decisioning 83% of group life applications. We're instantly decisioning over 60% of individual life insurance applications. And all of this was really driven by this need to help our customers to get life insurance, to buy annuities, to be able to access secure retirement in an environment where you could no longer have those face-to-face meetings. So that really then speaks to the culture of the company, really from the top down. Prudential is a firm that, first of all, our mission is to expand access to insurance and retirement security for Americans, actually for globally. In my part of the business, we're focused on the US, but that culture really it is ingrained in all parts of the organization. And so during the last 2 years, you saw that there was a tremendous amount of innovation, a tremendous amount of focus on how do we still fulfill our mission in this new environment. And I think that it was really that entrepreneurial culture where it was mission driven, and that was the genesis of a lot of the changes that we saw. So, in the data science group, we actually have hired more people over the last 2 years than the history of the company. From a top-down level, in terms of transformation, we set up a transformation office specifically focused on transforming our traditional processes to be a modern company that can meet the needs of people who, as Rohit mentioned at the beginning, want to buy insurance instantly, or they want to get an instant decision. They don't want to go through lengthy medical exams and labs. Or if they're buying an annuity, they don't want to wait months for that transaction to clear. So, really there's this culture of innovation, there's this culture of trying to do the right thing for the customer. And the company as a whole is very focused on not only the customer, but on the employee. And I think that ultimately it's that focus on making sure that the customer is taken care of and making sure that the employee who is taking care of the customer is taken care of that enable us to make this transformation. So it's been quite an interesting 2 years for us.
Well, it's interesting that, I think a good definition of culture is really everybody knows what the right thing is when faced with the question. And that goes to Rohit's point about speed. If everybody knows what the right thing is, then you have a lot less friction in an organization. Well, let's talk about data and culture and mission and trust inside your companies in terms of a problem that every company everywhere is facing right now, and that is the problem that has been called the Great Resignation, or getting the right people on the bus in your company, as has been said, but recruiting from a pool, particularly in data science, that is a relatively small pool compared to the wildly expanding needs that companies have for talent in that area. We'll start with you, Rohit, and talk about you're the vendor in this panel, but recruiting and retaining people. And then I'd like to hear from our other three panelists how they are maybe using culture as a recruiting weapon, or data challenges as a recruiting and retention weapon. But Rohit, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Rich. So, talent is at the heart of this, right? And so the ability to be able to attract, retain, train people, and get them to be able to work with data, I think that becomes really, really important. And I want to try and, link this thing together. So everybody understands that you need to have a robust data strategy to propel digital transformation. I think everybody gets that, no issues on that. Everybody understands you've got to work with data, and data is valuable, and that's got to be in place. The challenge ends up being, apart from the right data sets not being available, the data needing to be stored correctly, to be cleansed correctly, the challenge ends up being the data in an organization is kept in silos. The data that is there doesn't integrate, and therefore moving it between systems is not easy. There is a lot more unstructured data that is available today. And that's almost 80% of all data that's available is unstructured data as compared to structured data. So, using that data becomes very difficult. And talent, like you said, Rich, in terms of the Great Resignation and having access to the talent, that becomes really, important. So here are two examples of how culture stands in the way of an organization that has a robust data strategy and is moving forward on digital transformation. think about a bank and think about a customer that has a checking account and a credit card. Well, the checking account and the retail side of the bank has a data silo. The credit card is on the other side. In order to make a credit decision, we now know actually your bank statement data is more predictable than a credit score that you might get from a credit rating agency for making a credit decision. And yet within the same bank, the checking account and the credit card data are in two silos. And it's a cultural barrier that prevents that customer 360-degree view, which is so, so critically important. I'll give you a second example. Whenever there is a customer interaction, that you're making a note regarding that interaction as to what is the problem or the issue that the customer has and that you're trying to solve. The data that gets collected as an unstructured data format in those call notes are actually very, very rich ingredients for enabling the next best action and actually preventing the next call from coming in. And yet the ability to use that is very, very limited. And all of this comes to what Linda started off with, which is change management and communication. It's about how do you get employees to understand that unstructured data is as important, if not more important, than structured data. Data silos need to be broken down, and that you need to be able to enable this so that you can have a better business decision. So, you started off by asking the question whether culture, will eat strategy for lunch, and how does that apply to culture and data? I would say culture transcends all of technology and all of data put together. So you really need to have culture very much in place. And that change management that Linda spoke about is even more critical than anything else in order for this to work successfully.
Linda, I have a question related to that. You probably all are familiar with the name Tom Davenport, who's been writing about analytics for 3 decades, I think, the professor at Babson, a wonderful person. And he said the biggest barrier to change management in the era of data ubiquity and AI and all these really wonderful tools is simply the fear that you're going to give up power. That maybe your power was based on, boy, that manager over there has a real gut instinct, and to admit that your gut instinct, falls short of data analysis is something that maybe more ego-driven, maybe older style managers. But how, to Rohit's point, I mean, how do you work through those sticky human resistance problems in applying a culture that maps well with data so that you can move at the speed that you want to move at?
Well, to me, it's a story of how you gain trust and credibility. And so if I were to look at the opportunities that were actually presented by the pandemic, here was a situation where intuition wasn't going to cut it, and past ways of operating the business were not going to cut it. And so, organizations were forced to work with us as part of their strategy. My data scientists, it was, in some ways a real breakthrough. And if I look at, the journey here, it really is about disrupting, the business model, how business gets done, how does strategy come into being. And so the data scientists are now part of the development of business strategy. And that's really the key. And it also, I think, plays into the point, Rich, that you were mentioning before around the Great Resignation. That's a very, very attractive proposition to data scientists, to be driving real business strategy. And I think that's one of the ways that we are retaining. It's that evolution from data science being a bunch of data, experiments. When I first arrived at Verizon, I saw a lot of fireworks happening. They were not sustainable. And it's also, a story of industrialization, the non-sexy stuff, which is, the data architecture, the data engineering, the data governance, the model registry. There's a lot that has to happen to make this all sustainable and to gain the scale. It's not just a story of data, it's a story of a lot of engineering as well. And again, going back to how you retain, there's a well-known statistic that people who go off to do analytics spend 70% of their time preparing the data, finding the data. Imagine if you had the opportunity where the data was there ready for use. And so that again becomes a attractive proposition. So there are a number of levers here. The cultural issue, again, is that journey of trust. And as I said, it began the big way epidemic, but we use data, we use AI to drive the 5G build plan. We're able to optimize how we use capital. One of the biggest issues was staffing. Like when did we reopen our retail stores? We needed the mobility data and a lot of other data sources to determine when that made sense. How do you adjust the retail store hours to the new reality? How do you do resource planning for a customer service organization that used to come in 8-hour shifts, and now they can basically work from home in 2 to 4 hour shifts? Way beyond what you could be figuring out, without the sophistication of lots of different inputs of data and AI. So it just became impossible to manage all that had changed through the pandemic. And that, I think, was just such an opening for us to make our living pushing data.
Shinu, the healthcare services field is particularly vulnerable because the last 2 years have just created situations that are almost tailor-made for burnout. What are some of the strategies that Optum has used to recruit and retain people? And I'd love your thoughts. I think Linda said something really interesting here about the way I heard it is that including data scientists in strategy is really that's really valuable because there's such a universal human longing to know that the work that they do actually matters. And here is a great example for people to see that their work actually matters. But how have you coped with some of the challenges at Optum, and do you like that idea of embedding data scientists into strategic teams?
So absolutely, we actually have data scientists even prior to the pandemic embedded into all of our strategic teams. So it has maybe not existed in the terminology of data science because I think there's always an evolution of this. What do we call it? Big data? What are we calling it? But data has always been a part of the way that we function as an organization. But going back to your earlier question in terms of the great resignation and burnout, I think Optum is a very large organization. I think we are over 150,000 individuals worldwide. So every time I speak, I always have to be thoughtful of which group I'm speaking about. But at a broad brush, I think certainly our clinicians are very much impacted with regard to just being on the front line of care as well, both on the work front, community front, but also at home as well. And so I would say there's a lot of work for us to do on the clinician side of the house. For the teams that I oversee, which are more on the data and analytics and the consulting side, the great resignation has been a great benefit to us, actually. I know it's shocking. I hate to say that out loud, but part of what has been in our secret sauce is number one, our mission. What we are doing. And to what Linda had said, we have folks with an analytics background who are very much driven by how does my work make a difference? And so the mission orientation, especially in healthcare, has been number one. The second thing I would say for us has been a great benefit is having great assets to work with and great things. And so part of being at Optum and specifically in my group, we have very large data sets that are quite attractive, over 100 million patient lives that are longitudinal. There's a mix up from a claim standpoint, from an EHR standpoint. So allowing folks to have great tools and assets to work with has really been a huge differentiator. And going back to what Rohit said in terms of examples, how does that play out? It plays out all the things that were said about unstructured data, where we do have a lot of tools around natural language processing. So as the physician is typing in the notes, we're able to look at it, not just from a text standpoint, but also from a linguistic standpoint. And that's really cool for people to be able to see and being on the forefront of healthcare. The other example I would say, going back to our mission, is one of the things that we partnered on last year is working with the FDA on what has been the vaccine, as we've looked at COVID vaccination efficacy, what is the data showing us? And so in partnering with the FDA, we were able to give them recommendations and information related to what is the impact we're seeing with children. And so I think those kind of things, the ability to really have a hands-on and nearly real-time impact in the way that individuals are able to make decisions and how the industry is shaped. I mean, for us, as I said, I hate to jinx it, it's been a real, actually, boon. We've been able to recruit at a level that we never had before.
Well, that's probably the result of decades of investment in the culture. I mean, because you don't make yourself a durable, attractive culture overnight, and particularly in a crisis. Robert, what have you learned at Prudential about recruiting and retaining good people? And do you have, has it been a challenge? And do you have any secrets to share, as the others have shared, of what works?
Sure, no. So I actually have had a similar experience to what the other panelists have said. The Great Resignation has been really beneficial for Prudential. We've managed to retain 98% of our data scientists. At the same time, we've been able to recruit very significantly from other firms. And I think that really speaks to a couple of different parts of the culture that are important. One is we have a structure in which data scientists are closely aligned with the strategy of the business. So data scientists have input. They see how their work affects how it drives business strategy and how it drives business decisions. And in many cases, we'll actually lead with data science in some of our strategy. That certainly is the case with underwriting, pricing, and customer experience. And the second thing that I think has been really essential to keeping our data scientists is that we provide career paths for them, so that if they're inclined to be if they're very inclined to be leaders of people, we have a career path for them. If they want to be technical, we have a career path for them. So when they join Prudential, we look at them it's not a job for them, it's a career. They can look forward and see where things will lead. But I really want to go back to what Linda said about the importance of embedding data scientists in the strategy. And that I think has been the secret sauce for us to be able to retain data scientists.
There's a lot of research around this idea of cognitive diversity as another form of diversity, including traditional D&I diversity, and that's having intuitive people, analytical people, and introverts and extroverts on a team together. Well, let's talk about the new world of work, and what lessons did we learn? I mean, I think about the only thing we can say with confidence is that we're entering a new world of work, that for many companies, perhaps most, will be some kind of a hybrid. But how do you maintain a culture in a hybrid world? And second to that is, do you think the data will reveal how people are most effective? There was a book that was a huge bestseller several years ago by a woman named Susan Cain called Quiet. And it was really, she really elevated introverts. 40% of people identify themselves as introverts. And it doesn't mean that they're shy. It doesn't mean that they can't work with others. It means that it is exhausting to do so. And the idea of putting an introvert in a cubicle is hell for an introvert. Other people are the opposite. Extroverts thrive being around people. Do you think in this new world of work and hybrid work, that there's an HR component to it that will reveal, this team or this person thrives with the following combo? But can you individualize it that much and still maintain a unified culture, Rohit?
So that's a very interesting question, Rich. And look, we've got 40,000 employees situated across 11 different countries, and trying to manage this future operating model, or the return to office model. That's something which is a very delicate balancing act. If there's one thing that we've all learned is that I don't think you can mandate anything with your employees going forward. So it's got to be a contract which is a contract that is built around culture. It's built around what people want to do, what they enjoy doing, and how can they be most productive. I get asked the question very often that if you've got people working from home, are they really productive? Yeah, they're actually very productive. And, you can see that because, we kind of look across our employee base and you can see, where that productivity is. But, I think trying to get to the right chemistry, to the right orchestration and the right business model will depend individual by individual, geography by geography, business line by business line, and company by company. So it's actually going to be very unique for any organization, any division within that organization, or any location. And that's something which we all need to learn to adapt to, because if you provide the right kind of an environment to the employee, they're going to be super productive. And if you try and force or try and get to an environment that is not conducive for them, just like you said about putting extroverts into a box, I think that's going to be very, very detrimental. And I think those organizations that learn how to be able to orchestrate this is going to be, are going to be the successful organizations.
Linda, what are your thoughts on that?
Sorry, I just had to replace my earbuds. This is a really interesting topic for me because I joined Verizon, and just a few months after we joined, we went into lockdown. And so here you are in this huge organization, and you don't know people. You never had the opportunity to build these relationships. And so this was really a very interesting experiment. So my observations in terms of things that I've learned here is, so a large part of productivity in looking back is not just, having the space to think, but it's also having the ability to influence. And I think that influencing is much harder to do remotely, virtually, than when you are physically together. Influencing is subtle, and it's hard to be subtle remotely. I'm also going to just note that I feel like people have developed attention deficits in that, as I look at, people presenting, the behavioral patterns are so different than when you're in a room together. So many people are sitting there on their phone. You can see them reading email. They basically are filling the time of the presentation as they choose. You don't do that when you're in a room together. You do pay attention. You may just kind of move your attention to answer a quick message, but if you were to behave the way that you do, virtually, it would be considered incredibly rude. So I think people's manners actually, have changed quite a bit. At the end of the day, I don't think you can be prescriptive here. I think that it's going to be a hybrid, but what you have to decide upon are what are the moments that matter. And for those moments that it matters to be together, you make that choice. If you're basically trying to do collaboration, if you do want to have that, when you're trying to influence a group of people, you need to make that decision. I also think, again, as somebody who didn't have the relationships at Verizon, when the pandemic hit, which is very different because I was at Goldman Sachs for 20 years, lots of relationships there, so I can compare. It's really hard for people to have collective joy, collective happiness, to even share humor or other sides of themselves, which create that view of the authentic self, which again is how you gain trust. So I see a lot of, upside to the hybrid, but I think, trying to find that balance is still so much of a work in progress. So we're still making a lot of observations in terms of, wow, that session where we're all together was great. What was it about it? Why did we need to be there? We're learning.
Well, thanks for your candid opinion on that. Sheena, related to what Linda just said, that there have been studies that show that somewhere in the realm of 20 or 30, maybe as high as 40% of your employees are suffering what you might call a low-grade depression, not hasn't risen to the level of a clinical depression requiring medication or the usual things. It's just simply the blahs, anhedonia, the lack of people are, but they're not showing it.
So Rich, I am going to stay away from any diagnosis, given I have so many clinicians on the team, as well as in the higher leadership who would be like, how are you even making that? But I do think so. One thing for our group as a whole, we actually had somewhat of a hybrid model going into the pandemic. Number one reason was talent, because talent with regard to where we prioritize the talent versus geography. And so we had a little bit of a leg up, I think, relative to other companies. Do we have a lot of work to do? Absolutely. I think, Linda, your point around influence and how to get things done, that is a challenge, because I think given, as we think about broader inclusion, the topic of inclusion, there is an inherent advantage to certain personalities, and also for folks who've had existing relationships. So have yet to solve that. The one thing though that I have observed that it was a little bit of a aha is, as we have been engaging with clients and as our clients have been mostly life sciences companies going through a similar journey, it's really forced me to sort of reflect on how do we want to engage with them, because we can't just the old way was, let's visit them on campus, or let's have a meeting, a large conference with hundreds of folks. But I think one of the benefits of having gone through what we've just gone through is the realization that people are looking for engagement and not presentation. So Linda, to your point, that was one of the observations that I've had is, we can't do, at least for me, we can't do the way that we had conferences before. No one can stand up there for hours and present. It needs to be a 2-way, 3-way, whatever dialogue. And so that's something that we're really trying to explore, is how do we, there is a certain amount of engagement, like personalized engagement that comes through in Zoom. How do we recreate that as we think about our client relationship, so that people are constantly having an opportunity to engage, versus what, frankly, we used to do, which was a lot of present. And I don't know. I can do a show of hands, but I don't think anyone wants to go back to that.
Robert, do you see a role of inside of Prudential of using data to kind of recognize when some good employees are starting to drift, maybe because they're depressed, maybe because they have problems at home, and if you don't catch it, I mean, that's sort of a fine line to watch, because you want people to have their own privacy. But I guess the larger question, is that can data really fine tune on an individual basis and on a team basis what makes teams and individuals uniquely thrive at Prudential?
It's a great question. So I'll answer it a couple of different ways from a couple of different perspectives. So we actually see the data in an aggregate basis, because we have a large group insurance practice. And so we see claims, and we see how the number of employees at companies shifts. So we see all of those trends, and we've definitely seen the impact of COVID and the type of claim that's been filed. It's had a distinct impact on companies throughout the pandemic. Now, as a company, we don't directly monitor employees' productivity. We do indirectly monitor it, though, because we've gone to an agile way of working. So we work in 2-week sprints, we work as teams, and then every person on the team has a certain number of they're called story points that are assigned to them. So even the senior most leaders, their story points may be about creating a strategy for the next 2 weeks. So from that regard, we're able to monitor productivity on a team basis. And really then what I've observed is that it's, this management is coming not so much from the top down, but it's coming from the teams themselves. So teams themselves, groups of individuals, they have the data to really self-manage. They can see when certain parts of the team are less productive. They can see when certain parts of the team aren't meeting deadlines or are at risk of not meeting deadlines. And so I think it's been a great change, because I think that you never feel like there's someone watching over you, but at the same time you feel very accountable. You feel very accountable to this group of individuals with whom you're working.
I think that's really cool. I'm also, could you just elaborate? We're coming to the end of the time, but maybe just a minute on sprints as a way of bringing people together, because I'm hearing this word sprints, or if you haven't, or if you're not familiar with the term and you're in the audience, it's just these really intense, concentrated periods where people get together, ideally physically together, and they're not some kind of entertainment filled offsite. They're actually, really hard sessions lasting, some finite period of time. How do you use sprints at Prudential?
Absolutely. So this just to build on a comment that Linda made earlier, it's the moments that matter. So a sprint is a 2-week period. So we break up our work we call them sprints, but they're 2-week periods. So rather than have a set of goals that we try to achieve at the end of the year and then work on those goals regardless of how circumstances change, what we do is we have a set of objectives that we're trying to achieve at the end of the year. And then every 2 weeks we recalibrate. So we say, what can we accomplish towards that set of objectives over the next 2 weeks? So we all get together as a team, all the teams meet, and they say, they do what's called a sprint review. They look back at the last 2 weeks and they say, what went well, what didn't work well. And then they look at how far we have to go to reach our objectives for the year. And they say, what can we achieve over the next 2 weeks? And then we divvy out the work to different members of the team through an allocation process called story points. And then we can go away, and this is where it's great to meet in person for those sessions when you're planning and you're divvying up the work. Then really every single day you'll have a short session where you get together for 15 to 30 minutes and you say, hey, how did you do? Okay, any problems, anything you need help with? But in that way, it allows you to have sort of this the best of both worlds. You can get together in person at least weekly, but you can also allocate individual work so people can work from home and they can work on their objectives and then come together in a forum when they can present back to the team intermediate work product or present back challenges. So that's really how we're aligned as an organization, and even the business. So it's not just technology, even the business is adopting this as well.
Thank you for that. I can only think that Peloton probably has given us a new vocabulary word that is becoming widely applicable in business. We are at the end of our time. I want to thank the panelists, Shinu, Linda, Rohit, and Robert, and thank you for EXL and your sponsorship. I think a really important event, and thank you to my Forbes colleagues for putting together such a high-powered panel. And with that, I bid you adieu.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you found the session engaging and informative. Thank you again to our partner EXL for their support. Have a wonderful rest of your day.